So I'm a bit. I haven't done a live face-to-face talk for ages. It's quite exciting, and I haven't actually done a lecture for ages. So I'm sorry if I'm a bit sketchy, but I thought I'd just because you're all in your, it's a 2-year masters, isn't it, that you're doing, and it was mixed of first and second years. So I thought I'd just talk a little bit about how I got to here, and January is a really good month for reflecting, and I had a little bit of a reflect, and I always shock myself at how long I've been doing things. So I thought I'd just do that, and then I'll just show you some of the artworks that I've made, and then you can get a sense of where I'm coming from and what my practice is about. So my whole practice is framed as translating nature, which comes from the idea of me wanting to interrogate kind of what nature means, and nature is such a broad sort of catch-all term. If I rebranded it, probably use something different now, but I think it's interesting in terms of what is in our nature, and then also what is in the natural world, sort of living systems around us. And the way, because I've been so fascinated with technology, digital technology, particularly from a young age, it makes sense to me to try and understand the world through a kind of technological lens. So how do we use these devices around us, the things that augment our natural sensory perceptions, how do we sort of use those things to understand things a little bit more deeply? So for instance, how take the example of the wind turbines out on the horizon, they're here. It fascinates me what is happening underneath. So once they've installed those wind turbines, they put a no fishing zone around the base of it all. And so although it disrupts the seabed and there's a massive disruption, what happens over time is that they become quite a magical ecosystem, because the fish and seals and stuff like that can live around there, and they don't get disturbed by fishing boats. So the seals go there because there's a lot of fish there. And so it's kind of an interesting, they're almost not artificial reefs, but they become these weird sanctuaries that were never designated as sanctuaries, but they just happen, that's happened because of the industrialisation of wind turbines. Anyway, so things, and how could you find out more about that? So my approach would be, well, we can use cameras and sensors and microphones and stuff like that to understand what's going on, whilst trying not to disturb the environment very much. And the way that then we would get that information would be through data. So I guess the translation of what we see into the technology that we use is always through this medium of data, and data is fundamental in all of those communications. It's how we communicate man to machine, machine to machine. And so this idea that the world is made up of data has never been more relevant. And I'll talk about why it's also a problematic place to be as well. So data is an art material. So yeah, this is my particular interest in the natural world and living systems particularly, and how we can communicate and understand them more deeply. So I started, when I was doing my master's back in 1996, I started learning C programming, and it was my first kind of foray into, I'd been working a little bit with the early internet, but it was my first foray into programming, and I learned how to do artificial life programming, which is where they're very simple algorithms, very simple rule sets, like if this chair is red, go towards it. And you can kind of control agents. And what happens is if all of the agents have got a load of those little rules, then it turns into quite a complex emergent behaviour. And when you first learn to program in that kind of thing, you can do tiny bits of coding and get these really amazing animations that run on and on. So it's kind of how fractals are made, how cellular automata is made. I should have put an example of that. Anyway, but it's how you can create simple animations very quickly. And I realised that those rule-based systems, they're inspired by biological cellular life. And it's a way to represent the building blocks of nature in computer code. So my kind of journey came from there. I was really obsessively inspired by that, and I made lots of different animations. And then I began to think, if you can artificially create these animated worlds within the computer, what would it mean if you could plug in data from the real world into those animations, and then you had this kind of hybrid of something that is an algorithmic animation merged with data from the real world, so it's being, the rules are being sort of stated by nature itself, so you're injecting life into the system. And so, and then from there on in, and this is still, I mean, at the heart of all my practice, 25 years later, it's still that I'm still kind of tapping away, trying to understand where that connection is, where those things meet in the middle, and how can I create something that gives people an experience where they're trying to understand that. So for me, data is about adding life and dynamics into an animation that is outside of my control because it's coming from somewhere else. So I think it will become clearer with examples. So what just after my master's, I was commissioned by to make work for the Science Museum and the ICA in London. And we created, me and a team of people created this digital wave. And this is a huge sculpture made of sails, like sail material. And at its highest was about 3 meters tall. So it's this massive structure that was projected onto. So it's an animated wave. And the interactivity on it, as you moved, you could walk alongside it and tap the artwork, and a layer of pixel rain, digital rain, would sort of overlay the animation. And to seed the animation in the first place, people could take their photo, feed it into the system, and then it would manipulate it in these different ways. And what we were trying to do was really make the digital tangible so that people would understand that patterns and algorithms and manipulation of images can be something that can be placed in an art gallery and can be something that is a thing of sort of awe and wonder to an extent. And at the time when we had this, we had really critical reviews from, there's a certain number of art critics who were still not accepting that anything to do with digital technology could be an artwork. And Brian Sewell was like, it's made of computers, it's a computer thing, so therefore it's not art. That was his kind of like bottom line, which is like totally not true now. Well, it wasn't true then, but completely wasn't true. It's not true ever. He was just a dick, that guy. Anyway. So we had these kind of problems, and at the time when we launched this, because it was so seen to be so radical, we showed this artwork on, it was on the TV, it was on Blue Peter for the kids, and it was on Tomorrow's World, which was like a technology of the future kind of program. And it was a really landmark piece of work. The people were like, oh, we can see how these two things combine, how people can use data and technology in the art world to create something that is aesthetically something that you would expect to be seen in a gallery. But I've just rewind, that was when I'd finished my masters, so we were all really inspired by the things that we'd learned, all the different C programming skills, and all the different technologies that were available to us. And one of the things I did as my final work was this piece, and this, I called it Artificial Life. And what it was this is my, I guess, my first attempt to work out how we can combine living systems with technological systems. So I set up a tank that had a glass bottom. There's a tiny camera here, and it monitored the fish from beneath, and these tags that were attached to the fish tails, as they swam around, it monitored where the tags were and could see them in a sort of horizontally and vertically. And then also as the tag got smaller, the camera would pick up the depth. So I had an X, Y, Z coordinate from the fish were moving. And from those coordinates, then I could generate a soundscape. So this is a kind of, like a sort of musical instrument for fish to play. And as the fish moved around, it created like a soporific kind of like a sleepy ambient soundscape. So this really triggered my imagination, and once I'd done this, then I was obsessed about using living things, and I was like, how can I take this further? How can I take there's so many problems with this. One is that it's in an artificial environment. Two is just a couple of fish, and also the fish are slightly hindered because they've got this kind of tag on the outside, so it affected their swimming motion. So I felt like that it wasn't technology in tune with nature. It was like me using technology to extract nature. It was like I was instrumentalizing it. And so I devised a way to do that, and it was a project called The Lake. And this project, so this is like 8 years later, and it took me 8 years to find somebody who would support it, who would fund the work, and 8 years to work out the technology behind it, and how we could possibly implement something at scale. And so what it turned into was this was the lake, and inside here, this is about I don't know, it's about maybe 100 meters across, and there's about 3,000 fish in here. And the idea was we wanted to track the fish in this lake in their natural environment, and then use their movement to generate sound and animation. So we, sorry, I normally do a warning, there's a blood in the next slide. So I got a fish surgeon over from America. We anaesthetised the fish. We implanted tags inside the body cavity of the fish. So the reason we did that is because when, if you tag a fish and you have anything on its the external parts of its body, it will, the other fish might see it as being injured, and so they will attack it. So the safest way to tag fish is to anaesthetise them for a minute, put the tag inside, and then stitch them back up again. But that was a really interesting decision at the time to make, because I've had to feel like I had to justify what I was doing in the name of art. And I felt like, I don't know, I wasn't comfortable with doing that to a bunch of fish just to create an artwork. So what we did was we worked with a fish surgeon, and he took the data that we collected over time and used it for a behavioural analysis of the fish. So it turned into this kind of like art-science combination, like a relationship between both. So even though I was implementing it, the information that he was getting was going to be useful to other people further down the line. And that's how I kind of justified doing that. So this is the lake. What you're seeing, so the tower that you'll see is kind of where I'm standing, up a hill. So you could walk out from the tower and view the lake. And it was important to me, and the artwork is in this tower. So what was important is that I feel like if we're looking at nature and trying to understand it through this context, it's important that we don't just drag that into the gallery. So if people want to see the work, they have to go to where the fish are. They have to make the effort to get out into the countryside, to be by the lake, and then they can see the fish where they live and also the artwork that they're creating. So that caused quite a lot of issues as well, because the funders were not sure how I was going to get an audience. It's one thing to have a big artwork in a London gallery, but if they're funding this work, how am I going to get the people that matter out into the countryside, which is like 90 minutes out of London? So there was loads of strange logistical things that didn't even occur to me when I set up the project. So this is the setup inside the tower. As you walked in the little door, this is about 9 meters tall, so it's a massive old silo. And we had a door cut into it. And then when you walked in, there's like a 3 meter diameter circle, which is the projection screen, with the projector at the top, and then speakers hidden behind it. And so when you walked in, you were kind of immersed in this digital animation that sat above your head, and the sound resonated. And because it's a cylindrical metal tower, the sound really bounced around. It was a really interesting way to present the soundscape. Oh, is it switched off?
Might have done that thing where it goes to sleep. But just again.
Let's try it. There you go. You said it was going to do that. So this was the animation that, that the fish were generating just by moving around. So roughly we tagged 16 fish, four different species, 4 of each of those species. And they're connected, each species is connected by a sort of a large, this sail-like shape. So all the red ones were rudd, the green ones are tench, and they all have, so they're all different fish, and you can see how close or not they were together. So the rudd are smaller fish, they tend to stick together. The tench are bigger fish, bottom feeders, and they tended to be spread out across the lake. And then over time, you could built up this kind of pattern of behaviours as it was playing the sounds. And what was interesting, that even there was only 16 fish that we tagged in that lake of about 3,000 fish. But because it was by the lakeside, when the fishermen would come up in the morning and set up their tackle, they'd come and check the artwork as if it was a map of where the fish were. So they'd come in and have a look where roughly where the most fish were, and then go and set up their tackle in that quadrant of the lake. And it didn't matter if I said to them that these are just 16 and there's 3,000 in there. They still made that association that this was some kind of truth, some kind of map of what was happening with the fish. But one of the things, there was loads of things that came out of it once it was up and running, and it ran for 6 weeks, 24 hours a day. And what we learned was that rather than having to look at the data in detail, we learned that we could just nip in at different times and see what was happening. So at dawn and dusk, the fish are really active because there's a lot more, there's more insects on the water. And then during the day, particularly on a sunny day, this idea that fish are sort of moving around all the time went out the window, because when it was hot and the sun was on the water, they would literally just sort of bask and move. So sometimes the animation was really static and the sound was really quite monotonous. And then at other times, if it was cloudy or if it was really raining, they would be much more hectic. So even without understanding and being able to analyse data formally, we began to learn about the fish just through this kind of like ambient visualisation. So it was a really popular work, and one of my favourite things was that the fishermen, I mean, they're not all old guys, but mostly old guys that are retired. They go up and do a spot of carp fishing, and they're the sort of people. Many of them had never even been to a gallery, and yet they were being confronted with a really contemporary digital artwork when they were just coming to go fishing, and they loved it. They totally accepted that was just a thing that was going on. And if anything, they were the main champions of the artwork. They'd go home and tell their families, and then they'd tell people, and it kind of generated quite a lot of interest naturally and organically like that, rather than being something that people in the art world were like, oh my God, you've got to go and see the latest, whatever it might be. And I think that was a really good lesson for me, and I found it, because that was, for me, it was quite sort of enriching, that I felt like I was making work that was connecting to people that it mattered to, rather than providing some sort of like contextless piece of work that people go, oh yeah, I saw that, it's about fish, but not actually connect with the fish themselves. So one of the, I think this piece of work for me was really important. It took me about two years to actually make it, once we'd come up with the idea. But I spent a good 6 years beforehand just thinking about the ideas and trying to understand how it would happen. And that time period now seems, I mean, it was frustrating at times because I just wanted to make it and I couldn't get there. But in hindsight, a lot of my other work happens like that, where I'll be thinking about things for such a long time, and finally the technology will be available, or something just comes together to make it happen. Generally money, in fact. But one of the things that this particular project I've carried forward in the rest of my practice was the idea that once I'd set up the animation system, so I designed all of these small icons, I designed the sounds that the fish could play depending on what movement they were making. I designed the structure and the location and placement, but what I could never design was the way that it was played. So it's like when you're reading a book, the writer can do so many things about telling the story and describing the characters, but they can never get inside your head to see how you're going to visualize what it is that you're reading, or how you're going to interpret some of that stuff. So that gap that is there for your audience is also there for me, even though I'm the maker, because it's unpredictable how it's going to come out. So until the data is switched on, until the fish start moving, I don't know how it's going to sound, and I don't know what it's going to look like. And that's the bit that's like catnip, because it's really, because it just feels like it's slightly out of control. So after the lake, I did a few more other projects, but finally I started really reflecting on what it meant to use data in my artwork when I did a PhD a few years ago. And one of the things that is, for me, when we're talking about data as an art material, was this idea that there's a massive amount of subjectivity in the whole data landscape. So often when you see data in the press particularly, it tends to be presented as evidence or as truth or as something that is very factual and very objective. But actually when you drill into it, the way that data is used, the way it's collected, the way it's used, the way it's analysed, all of those things are done by different people. So there's loads of subjective decision-making points within those data systems. And the way that I make work, I mean, the reason I like to describe it as an art material is because it infers that it's then malleable, it's playful, you can manipulate it, you can do what you want with it like you would any other material. So you can sort of bend it to your own means. And I think once you understand that you can do that to data, you stop perceiving it as the truth. And then actually it makes, I hardly believe anything anymore. But I think it's important to understand that it's not just this, it's just a numerical opinion in that sense. And so this data flow, if you want to use data in your work, some of the questions that you should be asking include this, like, why are you collecting the data in the first place? Does it exist, or has someone else collected it? Or are you collecting it because of your own, because of the position you're in? Is it wrapped up in privilege, or could you be collecting something else that is more meaningful to someone else that maybe isn't in your immediate community? So there's loads of questions to think about, and some of this came from thinking about how science is defined, tends to be defined by people that have written sort of the history of science and where we've got to now. So there's a lot of gender issues in science reporting, there's a lot of problems with data collecting only being stuff that is useful to people who are already in a privileged position. And so I want to consider that when I'm making work, and I'm like, why am I doing it? Is this the right thing to be doing, or am I perpetuating some of that kind of discrimination, I guess, in the way that data is used? So partly in my PhD thinking about the subjectivity, and then I started working with an organisation called the Open Data Institute, and it was interesting for me to sort of work as a curator rather than an artist, or a bit of both really. And I set up the art programme there, and the Open Data Institute look at the landscape of data, how we use it, what's open, what's closed, what's private, what's personal. And they work with corporates, and they work a lot with government, they work a lot with standards. And I wanted to make get them to fund an art programme so that we could invite artists in to work with data in any way that they saw fit. So some of the artists work, this is a data cardigan that she knitted. This is a map mashup that is not real. It's about expectations and reality. Privacy sucks. This was a whole series of anti-data slogans, in fact. But one of the things we did with this was think about what the type of data. So if data is a material, how can we start to define it? And I've kind of described it before as this, if you said to somebody, I was in a room, I was giving a talk to some students, and it was full of chairs and they were made of a material. You probably wouldn't say that. You'd say it was full of chairs, they were covered in some kind of velvet-like material, they were on a wooden floor. We had metal columns in the room. So you'd define the material with a bit more granularity so that people understood what you were doing. And the same applies to data. What data are you using in your artwork? Is it biological? Is it environmental? Is it about an object, or is it about a living thing? Where does it come from in the first instance? Is it social data? Is it coming from the government? Is it state data? And then is it real time? Geospatial? Is it kind of map-based? And there's loads of, so I defined all of these different kind of types, this taxonomy, if you like, to try and get people to understand what different types of data there are. And the reason it's important, for me anyway, if you're making an artwork that's got real-time data, like the Fish Project, and if you're looking at that work and you know that every time some of the animation moves or some of the sound plays, that it's been triggered in real time by a fish swimming in a certain distance, it's got a kind of, there's a frisson, there's an excitement to that, because you're like, this is happening here and now. But if you know that the data using it is archived, that it was from a couple of years ago, somehow that excitement isn't there. So it changes the intention of the artwork. So I think the more that we can describe what we're doing, the more it helps people understand the work and the message that you're trying to get across. So this is all online, and you can search. There's like 101 works, maybe more now, but you can search by the different types of data, and this is a really good resource to try and understand what other artists are doing in the space. So we need us. This is, I'll just play a bit. this piece of work was commissioned by the BBC and the Arts Council, and it's a piece of work that uses metadata from another data platform called the Zooniverse, which is like a citizen science platform. And what I was trying to understand is, so this is not directly related to the natural world, but it's more about people data and how people use the internet and how people are classifying data through this platform. And what I wanted to understand was how could you, if you wanted to think about what the essence of data was, and to try and capture, without being a straight visualization, try and capture this kind of like a sense of continual flow of people clicking and tapping and analysing things. How would you do it? So this is a series of 15 compositions that uses the real-time data to affect every single element of the animation. So every single corner of the shapes, every single sound that's played, every single rotation or flyby is all triggered by different bits of data. And what you end up with is this kind of very abstract data environment that is about the essence of internet activity. And it uses, I mean, it takes millions of data points and generates this thing that doesn't really look complex. And I wanted to play with this idea that often people think my work is a data visualization, and I've got I think there's a massive difference between data art and data visualization, even if it's creative data visualization. And there's quite a few kind of like online discussions, shall we say, about all that. But for me, it's about not using data in a very literal way. It's about trying to get to the heart of what's happening. And one of the things that real-time data particularly does is that it provides a time element. So there's not really many other art materials that can give you that sense of dynamic of things that's happening in the real world like data can. And so for me, that's quite exciting to see things constantly shifting and moving. And in a way, this constant flow is akin to what nature does in the real world, because the things are always moving. Nothing really stops. Nothing really is super rigid. There's always some kind of fluctuation going on. And if data was a biological system, then maybe it would follow some of those rules. So I've got I'll whiz through these two more projects. This is a project that I love, and it was part of my PhD research, and it's called Rat Systems. It's about naked mole rats. Naked mole rats, I met a guy at the university who's a naked mole rat expert. And we had this, I was looking for animals to track, and he said, I've got a whole colony. He had about 200 naked mole rats. And I said, can I track them to get their data? And he said that he's been looking to track them electronically because the only way they can observe them at the moment is to sit in the room. They write numbers on the back of the animals, and then they literally sit and watch the animals go around their nest, and they log what's going on. So to have that sort of an electronic system that did that 24 hours a day was really beneficial to him. So we set up this tagging system. And one of the problems with live observation of the animals is that it's 30 degrees and it's really high humidity in the lab. So the researchers were getting really fatigued, and then they would stay in there for 15 minutes, have to come out. So we ended up collecting a 4-year data set of unique naked mole rat data that hasn't existed, and he's used it to analyse some really unusual behaviours. So part of my the aim of doing that, one thing is to collect live animal data, but I wanted to represent it in different ways. So rather than this whole idea of explaining the difference between data art, data visualization, the different uses of data creatively, I wanted to actively demonstrate that. So this was the animation. This is a straightforward visualization of where the animals are in the nest. And you could see that. You could see when it was feeding time, they'd all be in one area. And at night time, they'd all congregate in the nest. So that was one part of it. And then the other part of the project was to another animation that uses the animal location data to see where they are in the nest and what they're doing, and which ones are kind of like clumped together. And so the animation, I don't think this is a video. Yeah, no. So the animation moves around and it plays as sort of another soundscape. And you can drag, as you drag your mouse, you can kind of like change the angle of what's going on with the shapes as well. So this is like the abstract representation of that, the essence of data, like I talked about before. And then also there was a series of soft robotic sculptures. And this project, I wanted to work with some objects that moved in an organic way, but looked definitely not like they were sort of living creatures. So they've got these graphic markings on them, and they're like triangular and square shapes. So they look like artificial things, but they move as if they're real objects. And I did, when I first came to Margate, I set up this experiment in the basement of Cliff's Cafe. And he let me in there, and I had these sculptures working. And then I asked people from Margate whether they thought they could see life within the objects. And I did a whole study on it. And what came out of the study was that they felt, the people that knew the data was coming from living things talked about these three sculptures as if they had some kind of communal like interaction between each other. And they thought that there was some connection between them. And then the people that I didn't tell that it was natural data, they just thought they were individual creatures working alone. But everybody thought that there was some kind of living thing within them. And they have this kind of dance, data dance that they do. I showed this project to the Margate WI. And all the old ladies in the front were like, oh, it's really phallic. And then they just all started talking about penises. It's hilarious. And this is a naked mole rat, so you can see what probably triggered them actually. So these are about maybe 10 centimetres long. And they're, one of the other parts of the project was to think about what the data, like the sort of context of the data means. So it's one thing to track the animals and make an artwork. It's one thing to get them to use their movement to make movement in the real world, in the kinetic objects. But I was also thinking about what it means for data privacy. So I commissioned a photographer to take individual portraits of each of the animals, and then I redacted their eyes for privacy. And one of the things I learned when I was researching this was that in Africa, or if you go on safari somewhere and you take pictures of rare animals, so people, if they see elephants and stuff like that, people were taking pictures. The location metadata was attached to that picture. They'd upload them to social media, and then collectors and poachers were scanning Instagram and Twitter and Facebook to get the location data so that they could go and then either kill the animal or take the ivory and stuff like that. So that the tourists were accidentally working as a kind of tracking system for poachers to get their prey. And so I found that quite upsetting. And now actually, if you go on safari, many of them have notices up saying, if you take pictures, switch off your location data before you do it. But it occurred to me that people are fairly concerned with their own data privacy, but rarely do we think about animal data privacy. And it's not just animals, it's wild, like flora as well, so rare orchids or other kind of rare plants and trees and stuff. People take pictures and put them online, and then collectors will go out there and then dig them up or or collect them and sell them. So it's really important to think about how pervasive our technology, the data collection that happens in our technology, it's not just about humans, but it's about other species as well. And so the artwork, this set of photographs was all about that point. And invariably, if I show this work, there's 24 of these, and we show them as large prints. People always ask why the black lines, and then it's a really easy way to tell the story of protecting privacy. So this is the whole project, Rat Systems, consists of all of these elements. So using data as an art material for sculptural purposes, to add the dynamic in the object, to create sound and animation, to use data as a sort of contextual, like conceptual thing, and then also to use data as a straight visualization. And in the project, for me, the data is the same thing, but the outputs are all very different. Yeah. And then just briefly, this is another piece of work that was at the V&A last year. And this was a huge project with a team, and I worked with Bristol University and Newcastle. And it was like a 3-year project. And at Bristol University, they've been making these things that are they're like batteries. They're called microbial fuel cells, and they're objects. These are them. They're like a sort of brick-shaped object, and inside they've got bacteria, sludgy bacteria, and the bacteria that's in them feeds off of human urine. And when it feeds and metabolizes the human urine, it generates electricity. So this project is all about how we can consider the idea of using our own human waste to create energy to power our digital technology. So this whole artwork is powered by piss, essentially. And inside there are 15 microbial fuel cells, about 2 litres of urine. And then it generates enough power. It doesn't power the screens, but it powers all of the LED lighting. It powers a small computer that is used to collect the data from the microbial fuel cells, and it powers the device that transmits that data to the internet. So this whole project is about how can we make sustainable digital artwork that isn't kind of a drain on the system, but also how can we think about utilising our own waste. We're really used to recycling loads of other stuff, but we never think about recycling ourselves. And that it's relatively simple to create these systems that can generate power from urine. And there are other people that are doing poo power, but I was less interested in that. So what we did with the data, I created another animation that looked at the sort of inside of helped us understand the inside. So this is a representation of the microbes and the biofilm that they create. And again, it generated, it generated a soundscape. And with this one, because I was working with scientists, there was a need to for people to understand the data as well as just have a piece of artwork that was playing with it. So on here, I called it a data layer. And this is the first time that I've kind of capitulated and allowed the data to be visible, if you like. So this uses real-time data from the microbial fuel cells. So there's 15 streams of data that come in, and we monitor the current and the voltage, the pH level of the liquid, and use those different data points. But if you roll your mouse around, you can see in the data tab how much stack voltage is being generated, how much individual voltages are, the mean current, oh, it's offline, the humidity in the lab. So this data layer helps if people want to know what's happening behind the scenes. It allows them to see that. And when that's happening, when the flash comes on, it's because in this particular system, the batteries, it can generate electricity, but it doesn't store it very well. So it has to do, it gets to a maximum, the amount of power that can be stored, and then it does a power flush, and then it stores it again. So it kind of wastes the electricity just for this demonstrator purpose. So when the electricity is being flushed, then everything flashes yellow. And then we built in some other things so you could change the colours of the microbes. And what we wanted to do was make it into a bit of a playful interface. So as well as something that could be just projected as an image, people can root around and understand what's happening. And I think with this work particularly, what everyone wants to know is how much power is being generated. What we wanted to do at the V&A was install a toilet and have people literally contribute their wee to the system, and then it would be a proper sort of circular system. But the V&A were refused to let us do that. Okay, understandably, probably be a bit smelly. Sorry, you don't want to see my email particularly. So that's Alice, and that's that project. All of these projects are online if you want to have a little bit more of a route around. That's the Alice interface. And that was funded by the European Union, which involves a lot of report writing. Yeah, so that's it. So that's the most recent project that I've been working on, and actually we're probably gonna tour that to some other places once the pandemic has slowed down and let us do things. But we were offered an exhibition in Belgium, but because we're transporting microbes, they're classed as living systems. So so in terms of customs, it's just a massive problem to get them out of the country. And so what we'd have to do is get the microbes from the country that it's going to. So it means that any time we shift it around, we have to have the local, I quite like it with the local bacteria and then local urine from the local people to generate the power. So yeah, that was it. I was going to just stop there.